Welcome to this explainer. Today we're taking a fascinating journey through something you probably use literally every single day, but, rarely stop to actually think about. Money. We usually think of money as just physical objects, right? Like coins clinking in our pockets or paper stuffed in our wallets. But as we're going to see today, money isn't just an object at all. It's actually an ever-evolving technology. And more importantly, it's a system built entirely on one invisible, fragile, yet absolutely crucial ingredient: human trust. So let's dive right into this and look at where the whole shebang began. So, thousands of years ago, way before money even existed, humans lived in small tribes focused basically just on survival and hunting. But as these tribes started connecting, they realized, hey, we can trade. Some folks had better weapons, others had meat or animal skins, but there was a massive flaw. Just imagine you're a farmer with a bunch of wheat, and you desperately need an axe. You go to the local blacksmith, but there's a catch. He doesn't want your wheat. He wants milk. Now you've got to go track down someone who actually has milk and wants your wheat just so you can finally get that axe. If you can't find them, well, the whole trade just falls apart. And this brings us to version 1.0 of the economy, the barter system. Economists actually have a specific term for that blacksmith scenario we just talked about. It's called the double coincidence of wants, and this was essentially the very first bug in the human economic system. Now, as long as societies were tiny and close-knit, it wasn't a huge deal to just swap a few local goods around. But as civilizations started expanding, this bug practically paralyzed trade. Humanity desperately needed something universal. We needed something everyone would just accept without argument, something that held its own value and could be easily traded for anything else later on. That desperate search for a universal standard led us directly to version 2.0, commodity money. And the variety of early money here is honestly pretty surprising. Depending on where you were in the world, your wallet looked very, very different. Civilizations basically looked at their own local resources and collectively decided on a medium of exchange. In some places, cows and livestock were the ultimate symbol of wealth. They could buy you almost anything. In other places, staples like barley or densely packed tea bricks were the go-to. Across different parts of the globe, people were trading cocoa beans, pepper, and even these beautiful little cowrie shells as their primary money. Take salt, for example. It was considered incredibly valuable in the ancient world. In fact, in the Roman Empire, soldiers were sometimes actually paid a portion of their wages in pure salt. And this gave us the Latin root word salarium, which, believe it or not, is the direct origin of the modern English word salary. It just goes to show how deeply ancient commodity money is literally baked right into the language we use to talk about our own incomes today. So the really crucial point here is that while commodity money made trade vastly easier than basic bartering, it definitely wasn't a permanent fix. Local commodity money had fluctuating values. What was priceless in one village might be completely worthless in the next one over. Plus, just imagine trying to carry your entire life savings across a continent if your wealth is, say, a literal herd of cows or a giant, heavy sack of salt. It could spoil, it was super tough to divide up, and honestly, it was just a nightmare to transport. Humans needed something durable, easy to carry, and universally recognized. And that realization shifted our focus entirely toward metals. Which brings us to version 3.0, metal coins. Now, gold, silver, and copper were great because they were durable and didn't rot. But solving one problem just created a brand new bug. How on earth could you trust the metal's purity and weight? Well, different global empires brilliantly solved this purity bug in their own ways. Around 600 BC, in the Kingdom of Lydia, which is modern-day Turkey, they started making coins from a natural gold-silver mix called electrum, and they stamped them with a royal seal. That seal was a strict guarantee of exact weight and purity. Meanwhile, ancient China was busy casting bronze and copper coins with square holes right in the center so they could be easily strung together for transport. Pretty smart, right? Over in India, the Mahajanapadas introduced punch-marked silver coins, and later on, the Gupta Empire produced these incredibly artistic, high-quality gold coins. This standardization made coins the absolute most trusted currency for centuries. It literally connected the globe and opened up massive, spanning trade routes. But as global trade kept expanding via routes like the Silk Road, a massive new problem popped up. What happens when merchants have to carry massive quantities of heavy metal across entire continents? Silk from China, spices from India, goods from Europe, they were all traveling thousands of kilometers, and the sheer physical weight of thousands of coins became an enormous burden. Counting them, lugging them around, and trying to protect them from bandits on those long journeys, it became the single biggest headache in global commerce. So metal solved the spoilage problem, sure, but its weight was now totally choking the economy. Well, the merchants themselves found a clever workaround, sparking version 4.0, the paper money revolution. Instead of hauling around tons of metal, they started trading trusted paper receipts. And this paper money revolution swept the globe rapidly. Way back in the 7th century, China's Tang dynasty started using paper receipts that were so incredibly lightweight, they literally called them flying money. By the 11th century, the Song dynasty issued jiaozi, the world's very first official government-backed paper currency, printed on strong mulberry bark paper. Then, in the 13th century, the Mongol ruler Kublai Khan actually mandated paper money across his entire vast empire. When Marco Polo visited China and saw people buying everyday things with paper instead of gold, he could hardly believe his eyes. Meanwhile, in India, a system was set up that allowed merchants to deposit coins in one city and use a paper note to withdraw them in another, which completely bypassed the risk of highway robbery. Europe finally caught on much, much later, with Sweden and England issuing the very first modern banknotes in the 17th century. But as the world shifted from metal to paper, a terrifying new question arose. What actually gives a simple piece of paper its power? Think about it. Metal coins had intrinsic value. Gold is just inherently valuable to us. But paper, it's just paper. If governments or banks could simply print as much of it as they wanted, how could anyone trust that it wouldn't become entirely worthless overnight? To fix that and maintain public trust, society rolled out version 5.0, the gold standard. Under this system, governments promised their citizens that every single paper note was backed entirely by physical gold sitting securely in a vault somewhere. But the gold standard had a fatal flaw. When the Industrial Revolution hit, factories boomed, populations exploded, and the global economy expanded at lightning speed. Businesses desperately needed more money in circulation just to keep up with trade. The problem was, governments couldn't just print more money to support this amazing growth because they were completely handcuffed by the amount of gold they could physically dig out of the ground. The economy was growing, but the gold supply simply couldn't keep pace. Let's walk through the cascading domino effect that eventually broke this whole system. In 1929, the Great Depression paralyzed the world. Governments wanted to print money to help their dying economies, but the gold standard stopped them cold. Realizing the modern economy couldn't be forever shackled to shiny rocks, U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt halted domestic gold exchanges for dollars in 1933. This finally gave the government the flexibility to inject money into the system. Later on, trying to rebuild after World War II, the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement pegged most global currencies to the U.S. dollar, while the U.S. promised foreign governments they could still exchange their dollars for American gold. But by the 1970s, facing wars and massive spending, the U.S. had printed way more dollars than it had gold to actually back them up. Global reserves were draining, and fast. And that brings us to this monumental year, 1971. On August 15, 1971, the system officially broke. U.S. President Richard Nixon announced that the dollar would no longer be convertible to gold for anyone, anywhere. This historic moment became known as the Nixon shock. In a single day, the gold standard died completely, and the world stepped out into a totally uncharted financial universe. That shock launched us right into version 6.0, fiat money and the digital future. We are no longer tied to gold. The money in your bank account is not backed by anything sitting in a vault. Take a second to really process this. Fiat money has absolutely zero intrinsic value. It is literally just paper or numbers on a screen. The only reason a $100 bill or a 100-rupee note can buy you food, clothing, and shelter is because of a massive collective hallucination. It has value simply because the government says it does, and more importantly, because billions of us collectively believe it does. Your wallet functions entirely on shared human trust. It's wild when you really think about it. Which leaves us with this final kind of provocative thought. We've gone from trading wheat for animal skins, to shells, to heavy gold coins, to paper receipts, to unbacked fiat money. And right now, we are shifting yet again into a world where money is really nothing more than digital data pinging across servers. Will our grandchildren even know what physical cash feels like? The form of money changes constantly for sure, but as this explainer shows, from the ancient bartering tribes to today's digital wallets, the one true currency of humanity has always been and will always be trust.